Ready to start. So a very good morning to everyone, and especially to Dr. Christopher Willard, all the way from Boston, USA. And I'm glad that we're both COVID-19 free, uninfected, at least up to this point. So we're very grateful to Dr. Willard for spending his time with us, our morning, his evening, to share with us the science behind mindfulness and mental resilience. Dr. Willard is a psychologist who teaches at the Harvard Medical School. He's been meditating for 20 years and published a whole series of books. Many of them are also very suitable for children. He is supposed to be our keynote speaker at the Singapore Mindfulness Conference, which we remain optimistic that it will be held in August. But in the meantime, he has so kindly agreed to give this talk, reaching out to an audience worldwide, as we are now on Zoom and later will be posted onto YouTube. So a warm welcome to Dr. Willard, and may I now invite you to start.
Great, thank you so much, Angie, and to the Brahm Center and to everyone watching and tuning in on this morning where you are. So I thought we would just open with a short practice. I'll just invite everyone to just sit upright for a moment. You can find a comfortable posture that works for you. And if you feel comfortable, you can just allow your eyes to close. And I'll just ring the bell. And you can just enjoy the sound of the bell as it fades. And just becoming aware of your breath. A gentle rise and fall of each breath. And we're also any sounds perhaps around you at a distance or closer by. And aware of your body in space, as well as the sensations of your body. Just feeling your legs beneath you on the chair, your feet on the ground. And perhaps just picking one of these as the anchor of your attention, your breath or sound or sensations in your body. And pretty soon you may just notice thoughts, worries, and each time you notice a thought or a worry, you can recognize that thought. Noticing that your mind has wandered, just gently returning your attention, your awareness back to your body, to your breath, to the sounds around you. And pretty soon again, mind may just wander off to the past, to the future. Just recognizing when it's gone and where it's gone. And then just gently returning once more just to rest your awareness on whatever the anchor is for you. So that if your mind wanders off a dozen times, 1,000 times, it's just that many opportunities to notice your mind wandering, recognize that, recognize where it's wandered, just gently return. And I'll ring the bell once more. And you can just bring your awareness, your attention back to me, back to the screen in front of you, the world around you. I like this really simple practice. I learned this from my friend Brian. He calls it the 3 R's of mindfulness. We just begin by resting our awareness on our anchor of attention. Maybe it's sounds or the body or the breath, something that keeps us in the present. And then the second R is we just recognize when our mind has wandered. And we also recognize where it's wandered. And then we just gently return back to resting. And it really is, I think, one misconception of mindfulness that I struggled with for a number of years. The moment of mindfulness is not the moment that we think our mind is still or something like that. The moment of mindfulness, in fact, is the moment that we recognize that our mind is wandering. And that's the moment of insight when we see where it's wandering. We practice a little self-compassion as we just gently return again and again. So, welcome back to the present. And the present is, of course, these days, somewhat of a challenging place to be. And I just want to share a little bit about how we can think about building just more resilient communities for ourselves, more resilient families if we're living with a family, more resilient workplaces, even if we are working from home, and really more resilient communities, more resilient cultures and countries. My hope in this time is that we actually come out of this, all of us, stronger and more resilient. And what else has been interesting to me in my years of studying resilience, as well as studying mindfulness and positive psychology and other contemplative practices, is that the norm, in fact, in our human experience is, in a difficult situation, is growth, is positive growth and change, is what we call post-traumatic growth. In fact, is far more common than post-traumatic stress. And one of the things that I find interesting is just to look to contemporary science, neuroscience in particular, and social science, to see what it is that works to help tilt us toward post-traumatic growth. But we can also certainly look across human history, across all kinds of different practices that people have engaged in incredibly difficult moments in human history. That's really helped them move toward post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. And that's a number of things that we'll be exploring today, including practices like mindfulness, gratitude, really just slowing down and finding different ways of taking perspective, essentially, on our situation. I think also for those of us who maybe are around other people, which is, maybe we're in some degree of isolation, but we're living with families, and we're still, being a part of a larger community and being responsible for others in the community, responsible for others, especially as we think about isolating and sheltering in place, whatever the term might be that you're using there in Singapore. It's probably different here a little bit. But a story I keep kind of coming back to is thinking about the story of refugees after the war in Vietnam, not so far from where folks are in Singapore and in the Straits. And after the war, of course, there were boats full of refugees fleeing from the South. And people started to notice, and one meditation teacher in particular started to really notice that the people, when people were able to stay calm in the boat, just one person could stay calm, right, the whole boat could actually stay calm. That was actually really contagious to everyone. If one person started to panic or became overwhelmed, that could actually set off a chain reaction of panic in the boat that could possibly sink it, because these boats were so overcrowded. And yet, again, the one calm person, right? Oftentimes that becomes us if we are an important person in the family. It becomes us if we're an important person in our local, whatever our local communities might be that, cut across different kinds of things in the world that we're in, whether it's the workplace, whether it's other kinds of communities that we're a part of. If we can be that person who's able to remain calm, right, we can end up having this ripple effect. And one of the most interesting things I'm finding about mindfulness and other benefits is that they're really contagious. They really spread from person to person. So that if just one parent practices mindfulness, for example, what starts to happen is that the other people in the family are happier and communication is better. If one person in the workplace, if the boss in the workplace is able to bring a bit more mindfulness and self-regulation, that starts to affect the other employees that are maybe working for him or her, right? In a couple, in a partnership, if one person in the couple is practicing mindfulness, the other person in the couple, the husband or wife, is actually happier with the relationship, and they're happier and communication is better, right? Even just roommates living together, actually, one person's mindfulness impacts them. So it really does start to spread person to person to person. And I think also about leadership in some other ways. Again, maybe you're in a corporate leadership position or a family leadership position, or even a governmental or municipal leadership position. And I read this wonderful article a couple of weeks ago when someone was talking about how do we help other people through this difficult time. And they said, well, think about being on an airplane. And from time to time, of course, the airplane hits turbulence. We've all been there, right? And when there's turbulence on the airplane, right, everyone kind of like looks up, looks around, looks a little bit nervous. And the captain says, ding. Okay, the captain actually says a few things, but one thing they say is, right, we're going to be experiencing some turbulence and we're going to change course. I'm checking with what we need to do and we'll get through it. I'll let you know when we're out the other side. So we're helping other people feel safe, right, is what the captain is doing. The other thing, of course, they say on an airplane in the event of an emergency is that you put your own oxygen mask on first and then maybe the person next to you, right? We really need to first take care of ourselves, and then it really allows it to start to trickle out around us. And again, both the calm and clear seeing that we get from mindfulness is contagious, but certainly also we know that stress is unfortunately really contagious. We can really see this happening all over the place in a number of different ways. And I just want to, if you'll bear with me, I'd like to do a little bit of a demonstration of what's going on in terms of the stress response in our bodies and in our brains, because one of the things I think that's really important to remember is that this is really impacting us on a number of levels. I often think about things in terms of the biopsychosocial model of mental health and thriving, or of mental illness and struggle that people are facing. And so what we can do is we can actually really start to bring mindfulness to each of these elements. We can bring mindfulness to our bodily experiences by taking good care of our bodies through mindfulness. We can bring mindfulness to our minds, essentially, our psychology, the biopsychosocial model, that's the more psychological, cognitive side of things, through mindfulness practices. We can also start to bring mindfulness and compassion in different ways to more of our social relationships, which are also really key when it comes to thriving. And I'll talk about all of these as we go, but I'd like to start with what I often do that demonstrates a bit about what's happening when we're under stress in our brains and our bodies. So starting, just hold your hands up like this and maybe begin by making tight fists like this and just noticing what happens as you do this to your body, to your breath. Perhaps also noticing what happens to your thoughts, your emotions and mood. Does your mind feel open or closed right now? And then you can just relax, open. And then just kind of collapse over in your seat like this, which is often how a lot of us feel by the end of the day, especially these days. Again, noticing your body, your breath, your mind. Are there times that you feel like this? Then I'll ask you just to sit up straight, just palms up like this. Again, noticing your breath, your body, mind open or closed. You can just put one hand on the other and just rest these both over your heart for a moment, just noticing just a bit of what this experience is like. And then you can just set your hands back down, or back to just whatever posture feels comfortable for you right now. So what I'm actually really having us do right now is really simulate a few different ways that we can respond to stress. And these are actually really wired into us through evolution. So let me try to get my slide going here. All right, if I can share my screen. I'm getting a little bit better at Zoom, as we all are, right? So when we're under stress, what tends to happen is a lot of us tend to regress. And you may notice this in yourself and your own behavior, the people around you, or certainly if you live with kids, there's a bit of regression that happens. And we kind of go back to being these cavemen that we evolved as. And we go into the fight or flight system as if we're being chased by a tiger. Of course, we're not being chased by a tiger. We're being asked to shelter in place, but we're still feeling these different responses. And what happens is we go into basically like let me stop the share for a moment. This is more the fight or flight response. We might want to fight off that tiger or flee from it. Maybe we go into a bit more of the kind of freeze and faint response, which is a bit more of this. And these two responses are, of course, extremely useful when we're being chased by a tiger, but they're not so particularly useful in the modern world these days or in the situation that we find ourselves in. But we keep falling into them, right? Some of us and some of the people around us, we might see them getting more angry, agitated, irritable, going into that fight mode. Other people really avoiding the situation altogether, kind of fleeing from it, shrinking from it, being in denial, which actually over time starts to create even more anxiety the more we avoid a situation. This is part of why we're seeing anxiety start to rise in people in terms of their mental health. We also see something of a freeze response. Like in nature, maybe kind of becoming camouflaged or just freezing for a moment. And that's a bit of a dissociative traumatic response that we might see in terms of the mental health manifestation. Maybe we see this kind of faint, giving up, forget it response like this. And that's a bit more what we might call learned helplessness, which over time turns into depression. The other way that people try to, maybe avoid these strong feelings is through using substances. And that's another whole topic that we see people falling into. But we have the fight response, the flight and avoid response, the freeze response, the forget it response. And these turn into things like more anger, more addiction, right? More anxiety, more depression. And this is what we really want to have not happen to ourselves and to the people around us during this really difficult time. Because what happens in this mode is it really starts to turn on the brain's alarm system, the amygdala, and the limbic system. And of course, when there's an alarm going off, it's hard to work, it's hard to care for other people, it's hard to really do anything, right? Everything starts to look like an enemy or a threat, and that starts to become even more dangerous. We start to think, in somewhat paranoid ways, and we probably see that in some people around us or sometimes ourselves, really becoming even more anxious. We also start to see in our bodies what starts to happen. Breath tightens up, heart rate goes up, right? Our digestive system actually shuts down when we're stressed out. Our immune system actually shuts down as well because we're not able to, these things are not where our energy is really going. It's going toward the short term, not toward the long term in terms of survival. We also actually crave different foods. A lot of people I've been working with as a clinical psychologist have been telling me they're craving junk food all the time. Well, it makes sense. If you're being chased by a wild tiger, of course, you want sugar and salt and fat and things like that that are going to give you energy to run away from the problem. You're probably not craving kale or something that's a little bit healthier, right? So what happens is this changes our whole bodies. It changes what's happening in terms of our brains and their functioning, just really focused on the short term, only interpreting things as a danger, having a hard time finding safety. It also impacts our relationships in a lot of ways because we're seeing other people as a threat. And it also impacts our closer relationships because cortisol, the stress hormone, actually starts to shut down another really important neurohormone called oxytocin, which is the love and connection and attachment hormone that allows us to feel safe and secure. Now, this is particularly worrisome when we're in a stressful situation like this because it causes a traumatic kind of break between people in terms of really not trusting each other and that kind of thing. So this is really the bad news about stress and the stress response. Now, the good news is that as human beings, we've actually evolved quite a bit over time, and we have other really kind of healthier ways of responding to stress as well that are actually also built into us. So if you'll bear with me again to pull up the slide, right? We have what we might call the attend and befriend systems. We can progress actually and be better people through a stressful situation. Attend and befriend, which I also call basically, this is mindfulness. And this is compassion or self-compassion, these other postures. And what happens there is that the amygdala, that alarm system, starts to quiet down. And when that quiets down, what happens is that the blood then starts to flow out of the limbic system. And it flows now into the prefrontal cortex, where we think things through and we manage our impulses and we see the big picture. We remember that this situation has an end, which is one of the most helpful things to do, is to remember that the situation will end, right? We don't know how or when, but we know that it will, right? We can start to see the big picture. Not everyone and everything looks like a threat anymore, right? Which is actually great. Oh, my kids are not trying to get me. My boss is not about to fire me, right? I'm not thinking in such danger-oriented ways. I'm actually perceiving the world differently when I'm a bit more like this or like this. What else is happening? My breath becomes more regulated. My digestive system is working. I'm not craving quite as much junk food. I'm probably not craving kale, but I'm not craving junk food, right? The cortisol shuts down, the oxytocin starts to flow. I can build better relationships with my wife, with my kids, with other people around me. I can start to feel close to them. I can trust people. I can really start to be more resilient and move forward through this really challenging situation, again, that we're really all in here. And so what I think is useful about mindfulness in this time is really helping us move from this place of fight or flight, which some of us are feeling at morning, or sometimes the littlest thing sets us off or sets off someone else around us, right, because of stress. Or that just kind of forget it, give up response, which maybe some of us are noticing in ourselves during the day or toward the end of the day, or seeing it in our partners, or seeing it in our kids, or seeing it in our colleagues, right? Rather than being able to figure out how to really, as much as we can, and we can't do this at all times, right? But really try to attend the situation. Can I be with this suffering, this difficulty? Can I name what this is? Because actually, as we name whatever our emotional experience is, what that does is actually activates the prefrontal cortex, which means the blood then flows out of that alarm system and into the rest of our brain, right? That kind of thing. We can name it and we can start to tame it, and we can then start to grow from it. So we attend to it by naming it, and then we befriend it, which again is kind of taking some compassion here for ourselves and for others. And then we really start to grow through this stronger and better, more resilient out the other side of this. Now, there's a number of variables that really make this incredibly difficult to figure out how to actually more effectively grow through this. But I do want to just kind of come back to this idea of the biopsychosocial model. Now, my original plan, I created this talk earlier this week, saying to Angie, I practiced it a couple days ago, came out to about 2.5 hours, which we don't entirely have time for because I'm going to fall asleep pretty soon. But I think maybe I'll do a follow-up in a little bit. But the biopsychosocial model, and then walking through that to think of how can we actually build ourselves things like a more resilient body, more resilient psychology, and more resilient and robust social support system for ourselves and the people around us through mindfulness and other contemplative practices, again, to come out of this that much stronger. This idea of post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. And so the basics that I've been recommending to clients, and when I say clients, I mean both individual clients who I work with as a psychotherapist, as a psychologist, as well as corporate clients who I work with. I do a lot of consulting, including actually a few weeks ago to a company that was doing something and that has offices in Singapore, as well as other places in the world. But it's things like taking care of our eating, getting some degree of exercise, getting some sleep, and just learning a little bit how to regulate our breath a little bit more effectively. So I want to just turn, if I may, to a bit more of thinking about mindful body here, really. And getting some exercise when we can. I don't know entirely how fully locked down. It sounds like people are able to do a little bit of walking around in Singapore, which is wonderful. This has been the best thing for my mental health, I can tell you, is being able to take a walk every day. 20 minutes of light walking is actually as good as a lot of medications for things like mood, anxiety, attention, and sleep. It'll also get you more perspective when you're able to see things beyond the four walls of your house or apartment. And that's really important, to see that the world is actually bigger than the world that we feel trapped in. Even trying to see that the world is bigger than just the world of the screen that we're on. An exercise that I learned recently is what's called the 20-20-20 practice. Every 20 minutes, if you're spend all day at your screen, as more of us do these days, every 20 minutes, take about 20 seconds to just look about 20 feet away, which of course in Singapore, that's more like 6 meters, I would say. And just look around and notice that there's a world beyond your screen. And maybe look out of the window, that kind of thing. Notice what's green and alive, right? These kinds of things actually really help give us perspective. But certainly getting out and getting exercise if you can, although doing other things like some of these online challenges, yoga and workouts, things like that we can do. I also find for some of my calls that I have to do, getting out, doing some walking while I'm making my phone calls, these kinds of things actually really help. And those our social world and our social connections are also going to be a big part of what helps us feel good. I was talking actually to a college kid who's away from college, a university student. And he was saying, he was like, of course I miss my friends, but what I really miss is just the kid who's in my class we don't even know, but he's kind of like funny. He says interesting things, right? We will reach out to those important people in our lives, our family and our friends, but a lot of the social contact we end up missing is the incidental social contact around the office, the people that we encounter on the subway and that kind of thing. And that's actually really important for our well-being. So thinking about how can we start to build in as much social contact as possible. Of course, also thinking about what are the ways that we can maybe do a little bit more mindful walking, when that might be possible, and mindful movement as far as really, kind of actual traditional mindfulness is concerned. It's one of my favorite slide pictures that I often show when I talk about mindful walking, because a lot of us that have done mindful walking through MBSR, right, there's all these very kind of slowed down practices that are really wonderful. One of the things I've taken to doing during this time and recommending to folks also is just moving a little bit slower. So I was out walking and I noticed my neighbors actually across the street. They were actually, I live in a very mindfulness oriented city in Cambridge, and they're just really doing just slow, mindful walking up and down the street. I know one of them actually is a mindfulness teacher, but I didn't know whether she was deliberately doing that, but just really slowing down as we're walking and doing things like bringing more awareness to our senses, feeling our feet on the ground. As we're taking a walk, see if we can notice what's beautiful around us. This actually has been shown to really shift people's mood. Just walking and noticing the beauty in the world actually has an effect even months later. Walking and just noticing, see if you can notice all the colors of the rainbow on your walk while you're out. Or noticing all the sounds that you encounter on your walk around the block. Right? These things really help us savor the moment, especially when we don't maybe get a lot of time to leave our apartment or to leave our house. So I really recommend that. Even just in our house, moving a bit more slowly. When this kind of all went down about 5 weeks ago, I was moving some things up from the basement, moving some things down, because I knew there was things we weren't going to need for a while. And I was carrying a number of boxes in my arms, kind of like, stumbling up the stairs with all these boxes. And I thought, what's the rush? I mean, what's ever the rush, really? But it really was just such a reminder of, I'm not in a hurry at all. I'm not working as much as I was. I'm going to just walk more slowly up the stairs. I'm going to make a few extra trips, because why not? It's a little more exercise and I can slow down. I can feel my feet on the ground. And these kinds of things actually, they really do help me to slow down. So taking this time, in a sense, a little bit more like a retreat even, and just doing things a little bit more slowly. Another thing we can do in terms of our bodies and our bodily health, of course, is bringing more awareness to our eating, trying to do some more mindful eating. Perhaps some of us have done some mindful eating, like bringing all 5 of our senses, our entire awareness to the act of eating. And I'll just say a little bit about that in a moment. But I do think this also presents a good opportunity to take good physical care of ourselves and our bodies. Healthy, mindful eating, we know, boosts our physical immune system. And it certainly also boosts our emotional immune system, both of which we really need in a time of a major health crisis. As I mentioned before, stress is going to change your appetite and change what you crave. Some people are actually forgetting to eat because they're so anxious. Other people are overeating because they're so anxious or so stressed out. Try to get to know yourself, listen to your body during this time, and take some time to practice mindful eating. You can more mindfully think about ways to cook and chop your vegetables, right? Doing things again, like reaching out to others by doing things like teaching others to cook who maybe don't know how to cook. It's been a real problem in the US. A lot of people don't know how to cook. They're used to getting takeout, they're having to learn how to cook suddenly. But people are helping other people. And I want to say, that goes in the later part of my workshop, but I want to preview a little bit that one of the reasons that people do develop post-traumatic stress disorder is because of the sense of helplessness that they feel and a sense of not having any control over anything. Those are some of the biggest predictors of post-traumatic stress. Well, if you're in a traumatic situation and you can find some way to have a bit of control, to find some way to be a bit helpless, and in fact, maybe even helpful, then that actually really makes it far less likely that you'll experience quite those overwhelming feelings of helplessness, quite those overwhelming feelings of being out of control. And food, and I'm not saying to become a total control freak, but food is actually a really great way to do this, right? We can't predict what's going to happen in the next year, but we can reasonably predict what's going to happen today, and we can do that for ourselves, for our families as well, to eat at regular times, to make the meals that we're going to make to be somewhat predictable, so that we have some degree of predictability in the sea of unpredictability that we're all in. And that actually really makes us more resilient going forward to being less likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety or depression or some other kind of behavioral difficulty that often can manifest out of a really traumatic and stressful situation. Likewise with being helpful. If you look at something like Viktor Frankl's wonderful book, Man's Search for Meaning, he talked a lot about getting through his time in the concentration camps during World War II. That people got through it because they were being able to be helpful to other people. And a researcher I know actually did this interesting research on childhood. He does a lot on childhood resilience, but he did this thing where he was asking grown-ups about what were their most meaningful childhood experiences. And almost entirely, the kids described doing something helpful. It was being asked to be responsible, being asked to be a part of something greater than them, and to be given responsibility and to be helpful. And that's true of kids. And if you have encouraged you to encourage them to be helpful and contribute to what the whole world is going through right now, to be helpful in some way. But it's also really true of us adults to find a way to be helpful. Because again, we're feeling less powerless. It's that sense of powerlessness that contributes to the post-traumatic stress. So when we feel powerful by doing something like cooking or teaching others to cook or making food for people or supporting our local restaurants, so that the economy doesn't collapse, and also we care about our local chefs and that kind of thing by getting takeout instead of going out to eat, right? These kinds of things less likely to go out with post-traumatic stress or something out the other side of this. It's also a chance to be creative and to learn how to cook and create new healthy food habits. And again, if we have time, we can slow down and certainly eat in ways that are somewhat healthier. And we can really bring food and meals, which I know are such a big part of Singapore culture, and I'm dying to get back there and eat some more of your wonderful food. But again, keeps us feeling connected to ourselves, to our culture, to our family. It also helps us really stay in a routine. And I'll talk probably next time more about what I feel is important about routines. Sometimes it's hard to maintain a rigid schedule, but having a routine, again, because it keeps things predictable in the face of what is largely unpredictable. The more we can keep predictable, the better off we're going to be and the people around us are going to be. I also, a couple of years ago, I want to share this slide. I was thinking, which was taking a mindfulness-based stress reduction course 22 years ago. A lot of people say I still look like I'm 22, but that's because mindfulness keeps you young. But that basically, I remember eating that raisin for about 25 minutes or whatever it was. And I left the class that night and I thought, that was the most amazing thing I've ever experienced. I'm going to eat everything like I just ate that raisin. And of course, you can imagine 5 hours later, I'm, eating pizza like any American would, right? Just, eating it too fast, eating it all at once, that kind of thing. And over the years, I actually, brought a lot more mindfulness to my eating and trying to eat first few bites of a meal. When I was able to slow down, really made a bigger difference in the rest of my, as life's gotten about, well, there's really formal practices of mindfulness where we sit on the cushion and we just focus on our breath. And there's more informal ways that we practice mindfulness as well. And shouldn't the same be true for mindful eating? And so I wrote a little article for Mindful Magazine, and they made this lovely little infographic and if people are asking for the slides, yes, I'm absolutely happy to share the slides. I can send them to the Brahm Center. You can also email me directly. But thinking about what's more mindful eating, right? Mindless eating, eating past full, ignoring our body's signals. More mindful eating, listening to our body and stopping when we're full. Mindless eating, eating because our emotions tell us to eat, whereas more mindful eating is eating because our bodies tell us to eat. Our stomach is growling or our energy is low. And I would also add, in this time of major stress, eating because maybe the clock tells you to eat, right? Because it's 9 a.m., because it's noon, because it's 5 p.m., because a lot of us are actually forgetting to eat because we're so anxious. And I've been encouraging even some people to actually set an alarm to remember to eat. And certainly eating with others helps us eat on a schedule. But eating because our bodies need it, not just our emotions. Eating alone and kind of randomly, that's fine to do some of, but it's really most healthy to try to eat, kind of plan our meal on a regular schedule. Mindless eating, eating foods that are emotionally comforting versus more mindful eating, which is really eating foods that are nutritionally healthy. Again, it's not in between the two. Mindless eating, which is kind of eating and multitasking, which is, I think, probably more of an American phenomenon than it is other places, but being on our phone and checking our computers and doing 20 other different things at once, compared to when we're just eating or just enjoying the company of our friends and our family and that kind of thing. And then also really, eating as, just being food that's, something that's served to us, as opposed to being something that really, connects us with other people, connects us to our culture, connects us to history, connects us to farms and to the earth as well. So these are really all different ways we can just bring more mindfulness into eating. So we've covered a bit about movement and the importance of movement. We've covered a bit about eating. There's not really such thing as mindful sleep, but I do know that a lot of people are struggling with sleep these days. And so just to say a little bit about how we can just be a bit more effective with sleeping, but not exercising too close to bed, eating regularly because that sets up our sleep cycle, avoiding screens before bed, these kinds of things. Doing things like taking a shower or a bath is actually we have no distractions there for one thing. People usually say that they get their best thinking done in the shower, feel creative there. I think it's because it's so sensory and really so mindful. The smells, the tastes, the sensations, the sounds, all of that. And that's also a really great thing to do before bed. Trying to get to bed and wake up around the same time every day is also really, really helpful. And then some other simple practices, one that comes out of the self-compassion tradition and that we actually explored a little bit already, is just placing your hands over your heart like this before bedtime. And just trying a little bit of this, it actually really settles down our nervous system. It starts to turn down that cortisol and stress flowing through us, stress hormones, which allows the oxytocin to start to flow again. Again, those feelings of safety. You're giving yourself a bit of a hug. These really short, kind of just simple physical actions are really helpful in terms of helping relax the body toward more sleep as well. So these are some things to think about as well as you think about getting yourself some sleep. I learned this acronym a number of years ago, that I also use for myself and recommend to folks when they're trying to get to sleep. But it's also a useful one just for stressful moments in the day. It's just called the Calm Reminder, and it stands for chest, arms, legs, and mouth. So it's really easy to remember. And it's really just a simple body scan and relaxation. If folks are familiar with body scans or relax, just to sit upright, comfortable, or actually it really doesn't matter because you can also do this when laying down. I'll just ring the bell. If you like, you can allow your eyes to close. And just bring your attention on the next breath into C, your chest, torso. Just into this part of your body, noticing sensations, perhaps temperature. Is your chest tight or loose? Are your muscles relaxed or tense? Is your heart beating fast or slow? Is your breath regulated or dysregulated? Seeing what information you're getting from this part of your body, your chest, and then just tense those muscles through your chest and torso for a moment, and then just release. And next, bring your attention and awareness into your arms, hands. Are your hands clammy and sweaty, or are they dry? Maybe there's sensations in your arms, and then just hands, lower arms, upper arms for a moment, and then just release. Let the relaxation flow over you. Breathing in once more, down into L for your legs. A lot of anxiety lives in our legs, bouncing up and down, whatever it might be. Jitteriness, and you can just make your legs still and then just tense the muscles from your thighs down to your feet. And then release. Feel the relaxation in your entire lower body from your neck. And then bring attention into your mouth. Noticing just what's the expression on your mouth right now. Is there some frustration or stress or some relaxation, joy? What expression is your face making? We tend to hold our emotions here as well. And you can just clench your jaw, tense your whole face, mouth. Now I tend to hold my tension there and then just release. And as you release the tension there, you can just allow your lips to just form the slightest smile. As you just smile to your face, to the rest of your body. Smile to your experience, smile to all the rest of us here tuned in today. I'll just ring the bell once more. Attention back outward. So the calm reminder, chest, arms, legs, and mouth. Why don't I maybe go for about 10 more minutes or so with just a few more practices. And again, my plan had been biopsychosocial, body, brain, and relational world. I think we'll have to get to the rest of them maybe next time, but I'll just go through a few more bodily practices. Another thing that I think is really important, and that also comes up in a number of ways. When we did that exercise where I asked you to just tense up your body like this, right? You probably noticed both in the fight or flight response and the kind of freeze, forget it response, your breath was really dysregulated, is what happens for people. And I heard someone say recently that your breath is actually like a remote control that can actually turn the volume down on the alarm system, the the amygdala and limbic system in your brain. And then that can turn up the volume on the rest of your brain that allows you to think a little bit more clearly. It's why we use the breath in so many mindfulness practices. Oh my gosh, Kelly McGonigal, she's a researcher at Stanford, and she studies stress and all kinds of, I learned from her that what we want to do is for really optimal brain performance, stress management, and focus, to turn that alarm system off entirely, is bring our breath down into about 4 to 6 breaths in a minute, which I found amazing. I thought I misheard her. That 4 to 6 breaths in a minute, that's a breath every 10 to 15 seconds. But that's really what helps us get into the most regulated space where we're more like this in our bodies and in our brains. So those moments of tension or difficulty, we can find those little moments in the day, bring our breath down into this 4 to 6 breaths in a minute range. And as I like to say, right, our breath is both voluntary and involuntary reflex, right? We can regulate our breath. As we regulate our breath, what that does is it regulates our body, which of course regulates our physiology, our whole nervous system, and so our brains. And that, of course, in turn regulates our attention, which is at a premium right now. It regulates our impulses, which when we're under stress, we're much more impulsive and prone to falling into impulses. And it also regulates our emotions, which again, for a lot of us, have been something of a challenge these days to really effectively regulate our emotions. And I want to say, we can't do this perfectly, but we can find some strategies to do this a little bit more effectively. So one that I think is useful, the 7-Eleven breath, which I've got here, which is really about as simple as it sounds. This can also really help with sleep, or a variation triangle breath, which is the 4-7-8 breath. But we just breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and breathing back out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Breathing in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Back out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And just practice to yourself, breathing in up to 7. Back out again to 11. And then you can just allow your breath to really reset itself, right? A bit more regulated now than perhaps it was before. And then find those moments in the day, right? You know, right before you log in to check your email is a good opportunity for that, right? Right when the kids start screaming is a good opportunity for that. Before or after you read the news is a good opportunity to regulate your breath, so that again, you're shutting off the alarm system. Interpret your kids or the news is saying in a way that's reasonable and balanced and really clear seeing, and not just seeing everything as a disaster or a threat or something that's only making your stress worse. So it's just a kind of simple way of doing that, just using our breath. A kid variation on this, for those of us that have kids, this comes out of my book Alpha Breaths, which is a book for kids. It's an alphabet book for kids, but C is for the chocolate breath, and you can just imagine like you're maybe holding up a mug full of hot chocolate. I don't know what the best hot beverage is in Singapore, probably coffee or something, I suppose, right? I had a lot of great coffee when I was there. But breathing in like you're smelling, and just blowing out as if it's really hot. And you're cooling it off. actually in China doing rice porridge breath, breathing in, smelling, blowing out, cooling off, like soup or hot chocolate, something like that. So just kind of a fun, simple one for kids. So these are just a few kind of more simple mindfulness practices that we can think about doing that, again, help us to go, one of the unfortunate things about our brains is that they rewire themselves given what our experience is. The more stress we're under that we're not managing, the more we stay in fight, we stay in flight, we stay in freeze, or we stay in the kind of faint and forget it mode. And unfortunately, neuroplasticity, which gets a lot of great press in terms of the way we rewire our brains through mindfulness, it works in other ways too. The more we're stressed out, the more it wires our brains for more stress. So the more we stay in the fight mode, the more we become aggressive, angry people who are dysregulated. The more we stay in flight mode, the more we become anxious people and develop anxiety disorders. The more we kind of stay in faint and forget it, we start to become more depressed people, or the people around us do. That's what's the real bad news, right? So the more we can, and again, of course, there's situations where we want to flee or we want to fight or we want to just kind of say forget it in points in our week where that's absolutely necessary and the right thing to do. But if we fall into that too much, we rewire ourselves and we come out the other side of this with post-traumatic stress. Whereas what we want to do is find a balanced diet of stress responses, essentially, besides fight or flight, freeze, and forget it, and to have a bit more of the attend, befriend, or again, that mindfulness and compassion or self-compassion. And of course, what these then allow us to do is come out the other side of that a bit more mindful, a bit more resilient with our alarm system. Actually, what starts to happen is that alarm system in the brain, the amygdala, it gets less active, it becomes less dense when we practice mindfulness. Other parts of the brain that take perspective become stronger, and we're less likely to start to come out the other side of this, again, with those stress responses, but with a little bit more patience and equanimity, a little bit more also of just having compassion for others as well as compassion for ourselves. So the few kind of, I'll just end on this last note, but we can bring more mindfulness into our lives in a number of different ways. But one of them I just like to say is every so often you can just stop and ask yourself, what am I doing right now? And how do I know I'm doing it? And then check in with your five senses. How do I know I'm walking? How do I know I'm breathing? How do I know I'm eating, right? Really engaging all of our five senses in that practice of whatever it is that we might be doing. We bring more awareness to that. We get out of autopilot. We're not getting racing off to the future with anxiety. We're not getting pulled back into the past with regret or why didn't I do this or why did I say that, which is another place I see a lot of people going with a lot of extra time in their heads. They're regretting relationship choices or job choices or other things in their life. They're just stewing on those things, right? But our five senses, they are always in the present moment, unlike our thoughts, which are in the future or the past. So just asking yourself what you're doing and how do you know you're doing it with your senses. And even if we don't have time to spend a lot of time, right, maybe sitting and eating a meal for a half an hour or, or a raisin for a half an hour or sitting on our cushion for a half an hour, right, we can take a bit more time with even the smaller things to do what a friend of mine calls single tasking rather than multitasking, just doing one thing at a time. I'll just close with this here meme I saw online. It says, there's this guy at the coffee shop sitting at a table, not on his phone, not on a laptop. He's just drinking his coffee like a psychopath, right? And it's so rare that we really do slow down and just do one thing at a time, because when we start to do that, it really transforms our day, transforms our outlook, our physiology, which again, as I was saying at the beginning, is contagious to the people around us. It impacts our wife, our husband, our kids, our coworkers, our parents, everyone in our family in a way that starts to ripple outward. And so that we all end up more resilient, right? We're all in this lifeboat together in a way that can help us come out the other side of this, right? Not with record rates of mental illness, but with record rates of compassion and cooperation, resilience, again, for ourselves, for our families, for our communities and for our countries even, and even hopefully for the globe as a whole. So that's about it for my presentation tonight. I could go on and on and on, and hopefully I will again, maybe in a month, or hopefully I will at some point in person later this year. This has been such an incredible treat for me, just to even kind of see what folks' comments are. And I'm, again, happy to answer a few questions and hang out for a little bit as well. You can also, I just want to say, if you want to stay in touch, if we do run out of time, email me. You can find my email just on my website. You can also follow me on my social media, which is just at Dr. Chris Willard, Dr. Chris Willard on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff. But let's begin the Q&A.
Thank you, Chris, for that lovely talk. And the practices were great. So I think there are a lot of takeaways by people in terms of even applying the mindfulness practice to gain a little bit of calmness for a few moments, if not for the day.